Yes, friends, it's time to use the Cosmos Library. Actually, one of the most enjoyable parts is using the Cosmos Library, friends, because it's a place where there are ready-made modules and ready-made textures. Later on, I will also show in detail how to use the textures we get from outside in a few sections, friends. But Cosmos speeds up our work a bit more. Look, for example, let's say we want to use a wooden texture on the floor. I want it to have a slightly warmer appearance, for instance. You just need to download and press this button. The downloaded parts are already specified. Look, in the downloaded parts, friends, there is a right-pointing arrow sign. For those not downloaded, you can download them by pressing the download button, your texture. Let's see, for example, from this floor section, the texture you want to use could be this one. Let it download. Then we can use it. You can download and use the texture you want from here to create different effects. You can also use a texture like this. It's a bit up to you, friends. Using textures, of course, you need to try many textures to see what kind of effect they will have on the scene. I transferred it. I came from here, friends. It's active here. Look. Now let's do it. Like this, let's select it. I selected the ground. I transferred it here by saying apply to selection, friends. Look, let me activate the eyedropper and see how its size looks. It doesn't look bad, but if you think it's small, from texture position, not fixed pin, hold this part like this, and by enlarging this part, you can make the texture a bit bigger. Since the settings have completely applied themselves here, you will get the full effect here, friends. Let's use marble coating for the backside as well. Look, come here. Let's type Marvel and press enter. Let's see what's available. What can we use there? Ours is in light tones. For example, this one could work. It could be in black tones or light tones. You know, to make it more visually appealing, I'm choosing this white tone. Look, at this mark, I'm here. I selected this surface from here, friends. I said Apple to selection from here. I transferred it here. Look what happened. The coating fit here perfectly, or not quite. So you immediately go to the helper tools. You press this. Look, it fit perfectly just like that. You press this, it became smaller. You press this, it made it fit a bit more precisely. And if you want to enlarge it even more, you say texture position. You enlarge it like this and release it, as you can see, friends. In fact, let's do this. Let's turn around. There were coatings here. Look, the same coating is here. We can do it like this, like this. You take this with the eyedropper tool and you turn with the warp symbol like this. Then when you select these, this is one piece, this is another piece. Then you continue by selecting these, again like this. You can continue to change the coatings as you wish, in the style you want, like this. There was an excess of reflection on these. Let's take a look at that, friends. I'm selecting this one. Look, the reflection is too much. Let's significantly reduce the reflection color glossiness like this. Look, I'm slightly increasing it. Values of 070, 080 are good. Let's take a look at these. Check the reflection and glossiness value on this one. In the reflection value over here, these look very low as well. Let's do it like this. Sorry, let me select this one. Yes, these have texture. Look, it appears as texture here. These are reflections. When we do it this way, we are faced with a nice image. You can change the background texture here. On the TV screen, look, we have a hidden light. At the back, friends, you can draw a rectangle on it and assign a color or light to it. Let's do it like this. Look, I'm selecting this. I selected the mesh light. I said convert mesh light. I came to the settings. In the light settings, this value is for mesh light too. What should we do with this? Let's make its color blue, friends. Let it be bluish. I changed it. 2 or 3. Let's say in shades of blue. Let's go back like this. Let's take a render from our render settings. Let's see how it looks. Well, the ambiance changed a bit because we changed the floor, and these parts changed. I didn't really like this texture, but it could be a bit darker. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter. We have turned the shiny image here into a more gloss, that is, a semi-matte image, friends. The light behind the TV is showing itself, friends. It seems like the value is a bit too much. The wooden parquet on the floor doesn't seem to fit here very well because the colors look a bit different. We can choose a darker, more concrete-like color for this area, friends. Of course, the part about design elements is also very important here. Now, the wood veneer we used here created a completely awkward situation with this area. Continuing in accordance with these is related to completing your realism and aesthetic aspects. So it makes more sense to continue by doing those, friends. For example, let's come from here. Let's go to the concrete part, which we call concrete. That has its own style here, friends. Let's take a look like this. Let's find a more straightforward structure from the brick concrete part to make it colder, because the design has its own coldness. Since it's a cold design, look, it says flooring. Using such a coating would be more logical for us. Yes, it downloaded. Let's come, friends. I'm selecting this surface. Sometimes there can be such lags and freezes. It's like this because it's at the recording stage. I selected this. Apply to selection again. Look, my file has arrived. The coating has arrived here, friends. The ratio is not bad. The ratio looks good. The ratio and proportion part. In fact, we can also use black in the background here. Black looks nice too. It is pleasing to the eye, friends. This part, I will make this part black as well to make it a bit different. Let's come here. I think there should be a marble stone part. Actually, there are different things too. We can use them as well. For example, look, we can use this there as black in a different way. White. In fact, we can change their colors. It could be stone, but stone wouldn't fit here. I will use black. Let me mark this. Yes. Let's do it like this. Let's take a look at the last render we took for an effect. There is a bit of a problem with the reflection of these, friends. These need to be a bit more reflective. I mean, it shouldn't be like this normally. Look, it appears on my head here, but this is my color. This is the coating. When I say clear, it should normally look like this. Yes, it should look like this. And its reflection should be abundant. Why is it like this? Let's see. There's something here. Let's turn off this bump part. The image part, let's turn this off. It seems like there's a missing part in the settings here. Without touching that, let's take this texture and make a duplicate of it. It seems like there's an error here. This should have a lot of reflection like this, guys. I mean, right now, yes, it should have a reflection like this. Yes, when we say georeference like this, yes, now it's fixed. A reflection like this will work for us, guys. Yes. Let's look at the outer part of the frame on the TV screen. These appear to be plastic. I said edit frame. Look. Yes, it looks like this. Let the milk carton's reflection be a bit more as well. Yes, man, let's look here. Like this. The same coating is also available for this part. Yes. There are these models. Look. Samsung speakers. Let's see how they look on them. Yes, these also look like this, guys. We can use the same marble on top of this as well. Yes, I'm marking the closure from here. Look, it fits perfectly, do you see? When I press this, it fits right on top, friends. Yes, let's look again from here. This time, I will keep it in render a bit longer, so you can see the quality more clearly, friends. Because in Vray render, the length of the render time determines our quality, friends. Because the more light enters inside, the more efficient it will be. Look, there's a transparent view on this door here. Actually, we have a door here, but this door opens to the balcony. But it shouldn't be. Glass like this. So let's select this one. Let's see. The opacity is visible as a percentage here. Yes. Look, there's an issue with the settings here, friends. Some situations have arisen here. Let's close this. Normally this is the color. Let's add some brightness. Do it from the reflection section. Let it stay like this in the glossiness section. Let it stay this way, friends. Let's look at the door handle. Let's call the metallic part reflection IOR. Let's increase this as well so that the door handle remains metallic. So let it stay like this. And let the color be a bit darker. Yes, let it be something metallic like this, a chrome appearance, friends. We were going to increase the IES lights here. Let's look at the IES lights. The IES lights are at 5,000 lumens. I'm making this 8,000 lumens, friends. Let's see. I'm going to take a render like this. I will keep the render long. Let's meet after the render. I'm pausing this lesson. I will stop it. I will flash it. Let the render continue a bit. After that render, let's look at the quality again, friends. I will take at least a 5 to 10 minute render. I'm pressing the render button, friends. Let this continue. See you again at the end of the render. Yes, friends, let's look from this stat section. We are faced with such an image in a 3-minute render process. It's a very clear image, friends. However, there are parts here that bother me, friends. The texture here, this texture, appears as a flat surface. We will apply textures to these. The texture here, friends, we will apply these. The HDR outside is giving a bit too much light. Let's see how much light it is sending. Let's check that, friends. Let's go from here. From the dome light section. Look, the HDR shows 65. Let's reduce this to 55. This means giving a little less light, allowing less light to enter inside, and preventing overexposure. I set it to 55, friends. I close this. We can redirect the light intensity to slightly different directions and change its direction. A bit more this way or even that way. Look, a nice image has formed here. The light behind the TV image at the back has created a unique ambience on the marble here, almost like an electric effect. But the coverings here need to be changed, friends. The sofa coverings need to be changed. We can change them to leather or different coverings from the Cosmos library. That's all for this lesson. In the next lesson, I will change these coverings. I don't want to waste too much time on that, because these are things I've shown. You can do it too. You have the ability to change all the textures here with coverings from the Cosmos library. You can also assign curtain coverings for the curtains. For example, let's come here and I'll show an example. For instance, type curtain in English here and press enter. Look, do you see there are different coverings available here? You can download and use them here. You can use them either with patterns or without. Look, there are patterns here. This one here might be more suitable for us. Let's download and transfer this one. It came like this. Then look, from here. This is a slightly more classic type of covering. Of course, as I say in every lesson, organic covering takes a bit longer. I say apply to selection. It will transfer this onto it. As I said, if the covering doesn't fit, you can use either this or these two friends. In circular parts, you need to use this. Whichever you use, whichever fits best on the model, is the most ideal, friends. Look at the texture of the covering. If that texture fits, and the model appears smooth, and the surfaces look even, then there's no problem, friends. Look, there's also a model here. You can use this model, too, but it comes as a model, of course. Let's wait a bit longer and see what kind of result will emerge. Accordingly, we can change these with the covering part over there. You can change the others in the same way. There are types of coverings in the Cosmos library. There are sites that offer free coverings. You can download the textures from there and use them in the same way. Of course, since all the settings in Cosmos are applied, it's more logical to use and change these. Of course, since it's a bit organic, the process takes a little longer, friends. Yes, using the texture took a bit long, friends. I'm pressing this part here. Let's see how it will fit the texture. V-Ray has this kind of issue. With organic models, friends, normally, you can assign textures more quickly in Twinmotion, D5, and Escape, that is, in Twinmotion and Escape. But in Sketchup Vray, you need to wait a bit in these parts. Friends, when the texture doesn't fit perfectly, you need to use V-Ray helper tools to adjust this poor UV map part. For that, you also need to wait a bit, friends. Therefore, by pressing this part here, you will need to wait a bit for the texture to fit perfectly onto the model. Yes, it has adopted a fitting style, like this. But we can see this regarding the texture after taking the render. Let's look at the continuation of the processes after taking the render, friends. As I said, the process takes a bit long. Therefore, I will skip these parts a bit, because with organic textures, you need to wait a bit. That means a big time loss for us. For now, let this process continue in this way. We can continue by changing the other textures, friends. As I mentioned, we can't fully see the texture of this chair that bothers us here, friends. Let's take a look at it if you want. Look, here it's normally a rough texture, but what appears here is a smooth texture. Therefore, we need to replace it. Go with the leather texture from Cosmos' own library. It can't find some textures. We can find the closest texture color from this leather texture section, or we can find a color ourselves, friends. That's up to us. Look, a color like this would go better there. Or I would say, should we use black? But this color might be ideal for us. I came to the settings section. Look, this color, this texture. Let's make an example. For instance, I came from here. All are selected. I say, apply to selection from here for my texture. Look, if it fits on top here, we won't need to apply the overlay, texture identity, but let's see what kind of image we will encounter. I will do one of these. You can do the others yourself, because as you can see, friends, it takes a very long time. Yes, look, it turned out like this. By pressing this part, I can ensure the texture fits perfectly on the surface. Let's see what kind of image we will encounter. Let's wait a little longer. I mean, just like every task has its challenges, V-Ray can also have such difficulties, friends. So, there are issues with textures here as well. Look, it fits perfectly, as you can see. It made a longitudinal fit here, but still, it has a nice fitting shape. There is something with the textures here. Look, there seems to be an error on the side parts. We can handle it like this. Let's press this and see what kind of image it will create. After that, if we use this, it might make a fit. There is a wrong part in the textures, horizontally though. Yes, right now, it's like this, and when we press this, I think it will fit completely in these parts. In this lesson, it has been a long session exceeding 18 minutes. Friends, let me go back like this. I'm going to do something like this, friends. I've selected it again. I'm pressing this. After pressing this, I will activate the coating and enlarge it with this ratio. Because when I selected this texture in this coating, the fit was nicer. It was more efficient, friends. When I pressed this part, the fit was more efficient. That's why I'm going to use a technique like this here. Look, the ratio in this part is similar to the ratio in this part. I activated this with the dropper. I came to this. Look, it shows 30. I made this 100, friends. Sorry, it was 1,000. Let's make it 100. Did you see the value here? And the value here actually became the same. Let's make it 80 so that it stays like this. Now it fits perfectly. So instead of using this texture here, I used this tool instead of that tool. Because I used this tool, the texture fit perfectly on top of it. Look, we have created a nice, seamless texture. We will continue by applying all of these here, friends. I will do it not outside of the lesson so that it doesn't take up too much of our time. We will change this with a carpet covering that matches here, friends. By continuing in this way, we will make our visual more high quality. That's all for this lesson. See you in our other lessons. Goodbye. With love and respect,